The sun had started to drop behind the hills, spreading long shadows across the prairie like spilled ink. Eli McRae, the man locals called the Ghost of Cinder Creek, rode silently along the back trail of his 400-acre ranch, his saddle creaking slightly with each sway of his horse's stride. He preferred the quiet, always had. In a world that seemed to shout louder every year, silence was the last honest sound. A wiry, gray-stubbled man of few words, Eli was the kind of cowboy who only spoke when necessary, and even then, his voice came low and measured, like wind moving through dry wheat. He hadn't seen another soul in days. That's the way he liked it. Since the accident that took his wife and son 6 years ago, Eli had retreated from the world like a turtle into its shell. His days were filled with feeding cattle, mending fences, and brushing down his old quarter horse, Whiskey. Nights were for bourbon and stillness, watching stars blink into life across the vast Texan sky. But tonight was different. He first heard it as a sharp cry. Not animal, not wind, but unmistakably human. Eli pulled up on the reins, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the barren landscape. He clicked his tongue, guiding Whiskey off the trail, ears perked for another sound. Then he heard it again, a choked sob, somewhere near the edge of the property line where an old barbed wire fence ran crooked through the scrub. And then he saw her. A girl, young, no more than 18, was tied by the wrist to the rusted wire. Her arms were stretched high, the thin cotton of her shirt torn at the shoulders. Dirt smeared her cheeks, and fresh scratches marred her skin. Her head hung low, but as Eli approached, her eyes darted up and wide, terror-stricken recognition. "Easy now," Eli said, holding up both hands, dismounting carefully. "Ain't here to hurt you." The girl flinched as he drew closer, yanking at the cords that bound her. He noticed her wrists were red and swollen. Someone had tied her tight and left her there for God knows how long. "Name's Eli," he said softly, knife already out. "I'm gonna cut you loose." She didn't speak, just watched him with trembling lips. He sliced through the coarse rope and caught her before she could collapse. She was light, thinner than she should have been. She whimpered when her knees gave way. All right, got you now," he muttered, carefully scooping her into his arms. Whiskey whinnied, sensing urgency. Eli placed her gently in the saddle, wrapping a blanket from his pack around her shaking shoulders. "You'll be all right, girl. Let's get you somewhere safe." The ride back to the ranch was slow, deliberate. She didn't say a word, just held onto the horn of the saddle like it was the only thing anchoring her to the world. Every so often, she looked over at him with a stare somewhere between suspicion and pleading. By the time they reached the cabin, dusk had given way to full night. Stars blinked into the sky, cold and distant. Eli helped her down, leading her inside with a calmness born of handling spooked colts. The cabin was modest, a wood-burning stove, weathered sofa, old maps of the county pinned to the walls. He gestured to a chair and poured her a glass of water. She drank like someone who hadn't in days. "Got a name?" he asked after a long silence. She hesitated. "Cassidy," she whispered. "Cassidy May Rowe." "All right then, Cassidy May," he said, nodding. "You hungry?" She nodded faintly. He pulled a can of chili from the pantry, warmed it on the stove. She ate slowly, but with hunger that suggested she hadn't had a real meal in a while. Eli didn't ask questions. Not yet. Questions could wait. First came food, warmth, and the small, necessary kindnesses of a world she'd been denied. Afterward, she curled up on the couch under a blanket he'd set out. Her arms were bruised, and he noticed what looked like a cigarette burn near her collarbone. That kind of cruelty wasn't born overnight. Eli had seen it before, back when he worked security down in Austin, before the ranch, before everything. "You'll sleep here tonight," he said gently. "Bathroom's through there. Clean towels under the sink. You don't have to talk if you don't want to." Cassidy looked up, her eyes still rimmed red. Why'd you help me?" Eli paused. "'Cause no one else did." She didn't cry again that night, but she didn't sleep easy either. Eli heard her turn over again and again on the couch. Nightmares, probably. Maybe even expecting her father to kick the door in. But the door stayed shut. The ranch was quiet. The next morning, Eli made eggs and toast. She joined him at the small kitchen table, eyes puffy but alert. She was still cautious, still watching his every move. "He left me there," she finally said. "Tied me like a damn goat. Said if I wanted to run off, I could rot out in the sun first." Eli didn't answer right away. He just kept eating. "Was he drunk?" he asked after a moment. She nodded. "Always is. Every day since Mama died last year." There wasn't much to say to that. Eli had no great wisdom for grief or abuse. He'd seen both eat through people like acid. All he could offer was the slow, patient life he'd built, a place that didn't hurt. "You ain't going back to that," he said quietly. "Not while I got say." Her fork stopped. "You don't even know me. Don't need to. Ain't nobody deserves to be left like that." Over the next few days, Cassidy slept. A lot. Trauma pulled on her like gravity, and Eli didn't push. She cleaned her own dishes, stayed quiet, watched him work from the porch. Once, he caught her brushing whiskey down in the stable, her hands still unsteady. Another time, he found her standing by the fence where he'd found her, just staring. By the end of the week, her color had returned. She spoke more, never much, but enough. "My mama used to sing," she told him one night, sitting by the fire. "Used to say there ain't no pain that can't be dulled by music and time." Eli nodded. "She sounded like she was a good woman." She was. Cassidy's eyes softened. "She used to tell me stories about places outside this town. Oceans, cities, mountains. I always thought she was dreaming. Now I just want to see 'em all." Eli poured her some hot cocoa. "Maybe you will." Cassidy glanced at him. "Why do you live out here alone?" Eli paused, staring into the fire. "Had a family once. Lost them in a car wreck. My boy was 8. His voice cracked slightly. World went quiet after that. Stayed that way." Cassidy didn't reply, just scooted her chair a little closer to the fire. In the warmth and flickering light, the silence between them didn't feel empty anymore. It felt shared. Life on a ranch didn't move fast. That was its rhythm, and Eli had come to appreciate it. The predictable cycle of sunup to sundown, the steady thud of hooves in the dirt, the scrape of hay bales dragged across barn floors. After Cassidy arrived, the rhythm didn't change much, but the silence within it started to hum with a new presence. It was in the little things. The clink of a second coffee cup in the morning. The sound of her humming, barely audible, as she swept the porch. Even the way the horses acted different, calmer, more alert, as if they too were adjusting to a new energy in the air. Cassidy didn't speak much at first, but she watched. Always watching, taking everything in like a stray animal unsure if it was safe to eat. The first few days, she didn't step past the edge of the front porch. She'd sit on the steps, knees drawn to her chest, arms looped around them, face turned toward the distant horizon like she expected her father to come roaring across it any minute. Eli let her be. He didn't push. He just made sure there was food on the stove and fresh linens in the loft where she now slept. When he went to town for supplies, he told her she could stay inside and lock the doors if she needed. "You don't owe me anything," he said before climbing into his old truck. "This is just a place to breathe. That's all." He was gone 4 hours. When he returned, he found the porch swept clean, the firewood stacked, and the horses brushed down. She didn't say anything about it, just gave him a nod and returned to stirring the beans on the stove. That was Cassidy's way. Quiet offerings, subtle movements that said thank you without saying it aloud. In return, Eli offered space and patience. On the 5th morning, Cassidy followed him out to the barn. She didn't ask permission, just showed up at his side, pulling her long brown hair back into a ponytail, eyes resolute. "I can work," she said. "I don't like feeling useless." Eli studied her for a moment. She stood with her shoulders square, though he could see the slight tremble in her hands. "All right," he said. "Start with mucking the stalls. Tools are by the east wall." She nodded once and went to it. That day, and the many that followed, fell into an easy rhythm. Feeding, cleaning, mending. Cassidy was a fast learner. She asked questions when she didn't understand something, and she wasn't afraid of hard labor. Dirt under her nails seemed to give her a strange kind of comfort. Eli recognized it. Working the land gave you back some control when the world had taken too much. They began to talk more, slowly in pieces, over breakfast or while brushing the horses. Eli learned Cassidy's mother had died of pneumonia last winter. The doctor came too late, and the truck wouldn't start that night. Her father had changed after that. The drinking, the rages, all new, or at least worse than before. Cassidy tried to stay, to hold on to whatever was left of her home. But the last night had gone too far. He had a knife, she said, eyes fixed on the bridle she was oiling. Said if I talked back again, he'd teach me to be quiet for good. Eli didn't respond. He just placed a hand on her shoulder. A brief, steadying touch. You're safe here, he said. That's not going to happen again. She believed him, or at least wanted to. As the days stretched into weeks, Cassidy began to change. Her posture straightened. Her eyes lost their hunted look. She started to laugh, first at the goats, then at Eli's dry mutterings about them. She asked if she could learn to ride one of the horses properly. Eli, after some hesitation, agreed. He chose a chestnut mare named Rosie. Calm, patient, perfect for a beginner. The first time Cassidy rode alone, she was stiff and uncertain, her hands clenched too tight on the reins. But each day, she grew bolder. Eli taught her how to guide Rosie with subtle pressure, how to sit deeper in the saddle, how to listen to the rhythm of the horse beneath her. You ain't controlling her, he told her. You're dancing with her. You push too hard, she'll fight back. But you find the rhythm, the give and take, and she'll carry you anywhere. Cassidy smiled. Like people. Eli gave her a look. Yeah, like people. They started riding the property together, past the old creek bed, through the cottonwoods, all the way to the fence line where he'd found her. The first time they reached it, she stopped. Her breath caught. The wood still held faint indentations where the ropes had pressed in. I thought I'd die out here, she said quietly. Eli didn't reply. He just sat beside her on whiskey, the two of them silhouetted against the burning orange horizon. You didn't, he finally said. You lived. That matters. Cassidy nodded, wiping a tear before it could fall. The turning point came one Saturday afternoon when they drove into town for supplies. Cassidy hadn't left the ranch since a rescue. Eli offered to go alone, but she insisted on coming. I can't hide forever, she said. The general store was quiet, a few locals, old man Barrett behind the counter, and two rough-looking ranch hands near the back drinking sodas. Cassidy kept close to Eli at first, shoulders tense. But she held her head high as she browsed the dry goods aisle. Eli watched from a distance, letting her move at her own pace. Then he heard it, the mocking tone of one of the ranch hands. Well, if it ain't the row girl. Heard your daddy traded you for a bottle of Jack. Cassidy froze. Her knuckles whitened on the box of crackers she held. The other man chuckled. Maybe she's Eli's charity case now. Ain't that sweet? Eli started to step forward, but Cassidy beat him to it. She turned slowly, fire in her eyes. My name is Cassidy Mayrow, and if you ever speak about me or my father again, I'll feed your teeth to the hogs out back. The men blinked. One actually took a step back. Eli stepped beside her now, silent but steady. His presence alone said enough. The men muttered and walked off. Cassidy exhaled shakily. Eli handed her the crackers. You all right? He asked. She nodded, shaking like a leaf, but yeah. He smiled faintly. You did good. That night, over dinner, Cassidy asked about Eli's past. The question came gently, respectfully. You said you had a family once, she said. What were they like? Eli looked into his plate. The fire crackled nearby. My wife, Lillian, was brighter than the sun. Laughed easy, loved hard. She baked these little peach pies in summer that could stop a man mid-sentence. He paused. My boy, Danny, he was 8. Wild and kind. Rode the calves like they were broncos, even when I told him not to. Always had dirt on his knees and stories to tell. Cassidy said nothing, just listened. They were heading to Amarillo. A drunk driver ran a red. Kill 'em both. The silence that followed was deep, but not heavy. I'm sorry, Cassidy said finally. Eli nodded. Me too. The sharing of grief created something new between them. Not pity, but understanding. The way people who'd both faced the dark could look at one another and say, you made it. So did I. Days passed, then weeks. Cassidy grew stronger. She painted the barn door with old leftover paint. She sang softly to the horses when she thought no one was listening. She asked Eli to teach her to shoot, just in case, she said. He agreed, and she turned out to be a good shot. Calm hands. Steady aim. They fixed up an old chicken coop together. Planted new herbs behind the house. Talk more. They fixed up an old chicken coop together. Planted new herbs behind the house. Talk more. One quiet evening, Cassidy sat on the porch, sketching something in a worn notebook. Eli came out, wiping grease from his hands after fixing the old generator. What you drawing? She hesitated, then held it up. It was the ranch. The barn, the horses, the windmill, all in pencil, with a little label scribbled beneath it. Home. Eli's throat tightened. He looked at her, really looked, and realized something had shifted. She wasn't just a girl he'd rescued anymore. She was part of his life. And maybe, just maybe, he was part of hers. The rhythm of the ranch had begun to feel like home to Emily. Over weeks that melted into months, she learned to saddle horses, mend fences, and even ride like the wind across open plains, her laughter sometimes echoing into the sky as Dusty, the horse Jasper had let her call her own, galloped ahead. But as with all stories etched in pain and survival, healing doesn't come without trials. It was the season of reckoning, when the ghosts of the past rear their heads not to haunt, but to demand recognition and ask what has been learned. It began on a crisp autumn morning, the kind of morning that carried a bite of winter in the air, but still sang with the scent of dry hay and turned soil. Jasper stood by the barn sharpening his tools, while Emily, with a blanket draped over her shoulders, sat on the porch steps, sketching a sunflower that had somehow survived the season's shift. The peace of the morning was broken by the slow clop of unfamiliar hooves, approaching from the ridge. Emily looked up first. She squinted against the sun, and her fingers went slack, dropping the pencil. The outline of the rider became clearer with each hoofbeat. Slouched posture, tattered hat, a bottle glinting in one hand. Even from a distance, she knew. Her breath caught. It's him, she whispered. Jasper turned slowly, the whetstone still in his hand. His eyes narrowed, jaw tightening. He didn't need to ask who. There was only one man who could turn Emily's face that shade of pale and leave her hands trembling. The rider reined in near the gate, nearly slipping off the saddle. Jasper walked down the path with long, steady strides. He stopped just short of the fence, staring down the broken man who had once tied a girl to a fence and left her like discarded livestock. The man's eyes flicked toward Emily, then back to Jasper. She here, he slurred. Jasper didn't move, didn't blink. What do you want? She's my daughter, the man said, and I come to take her back. Emily stepped down from the porch, legs stiff as fence posts. Her voice came low but firm. You gave me up the moment you tied that rope. I'm not yours anymore. Her father's expression twisted, not with regret, but confusion, like he couldn't quite piece together how the child he discarded had become someone who stood tall in the wind. You think this cowboy's your savior? You think he'll love you like blood? Jasper's hand didn't move to his holster. He didn't have to. There was steel in his voice that could gut a man. She doesn't need saving now. She just needed a chance. The drunk man scoffed, unsteady on his feet. She's mine. No, Emily said. I was yours, and you broke me. There was a moment of thick, dusty silence. Then Jasper spoke again. You want something, you come to me. But you don't come for her again. You do, and I won't be the one talking next time. It wasn't a threat. It was a vow. The man swayed, coughed, then turned his horse with a wobble and rode off slowly, more shadow than substance. They watched him disappear down the ridge, swallowed by dust and distance. Emily didn't cry. Not this time. Jasper didn't say anything either. He simply walked up beside her and gently rested a hand on her shoulder. It was the kind of touch that said, you don't have to carry this alone anymore. Later that night, the fire crackled in the hearth. Jasper sat in his chair, a coffee mug between his palms. Emily, curled in the armchair across from him, was silent for a long while. Then she said, I thought I'd feel free, now that he's gone, but I don't. Jasper sipped his coffee. Freedom don't always come in one swing of a gate. Sometimes it's steps. Sometimes it's years. She nodded slowly. I'm scared of being broken forever. Jasper looked up. His voice was softer now. Emily, we all come with cracks. Life does that. But broken? You're not broken. You're just figuring out how to fit the pieces back together. There were other reckonings, too. Not just with her father, but with herself. Emily began to write more. Journals, poems, even stories about girls who survived storms. Jasper read every one. He didn't say much, but she saw him save the pages, fold them like they were sacred. He was still a quiet man, still didn't speak of his own losses, but sometimes in the evenings, when the sun dipped low and the whiskey warmed his blood, he'd speak of the war, of his brother who'd never made it back, of the wife he lost to fever. I stopped talking to God after that, he confessed one night. Emily looked up. Did you ever start again? He smiled just barely. Might be, since you came. That winter, the ranch became a haven for both of them. Jasper taught Emily how to shoot, though she didn't like it much. She helped him break a new Colt, Dusty's first foal. They named her Star for the white blaze on her forehead. Emily laughed more, and when Jasper caught her in one of those belly laughs that made her fall back on the hay, he couldn't help but laugh too. It felt like music returning to a house that had been silent too long. But it wasn't just peace they found, it was purpose. Jasper began teaching her the books, too, finances, crop rotations, weather patterns. He spoke of the land like it was a living thing, and Emily began to see it that way too. He didn't call her a guest anymore. She was a partner. Then came the spring fair. Jasper, never one for crowds, let her go alone with some neighbors, reluctant but proud. Emily entered her art in the county contest. Drawings of life on the ranch, of old hands and tired horses, of sunrises over fields, and a man whose silence spoke more than sermons. Her work didn't win, but an editor from the Amarillo paper offered to publish her sketch of the quiet cowboy in their weekend section. She came back beaming, her cheeks pink with wind and pride. Jasper pinned that paper clipping on the kitchen wall like it was gold. They began to speak of the future more. Emily wanted to stay, maybe even go to art school part-time in the city, then return in the summers. Jasper surprised her by saying he'd support it. Just promise me you'll come back. She did, with tears in her eyes. But not everything healed so cleanly. Emily still had nights when the dreams came, memories of ropes and shouting, of her father's slurred voice. She'd wake up gasping, and sometimes Jasper would wake too. No words, just sitting outside her door until the sun came up. Neither of them ever said anything about those nights. They didn't need to. One day a letter came. It was from a woman who claimed to be Emily's aunt, her mother's sister. She'd heard of Emily through someone at the fair, recognized her name, and remembered her sister's daughter. She wanted to meet. Jasper didn't push her. Your choice, he said. Emily thought about it for a week. Then she wrote back, yes. When the woman arrived, a strong, graceful lady with pepper gray hair, she hugged Emily and wept. They spent the day talking, catching up on years lost. The woman apologized, said she'd tried to get custody when Emily was younger, but the system hadn't allowed it. I never stopped looking, she said. And when she met Jasper, she took his hand in both of hers and said, thank you for saving her. Jasper didn't smile, just nodded. She saved herself. I just gave her room to do it. As spring melted into summer, Emily stood by the fence one evening, sketching the hills as the sun bled orange across the sky. Jasper walked up behind her, tipping his hat. That the new one? He asked, peering over her shoulder. She nodded. I think I'll call it after the storm. She nodded. I think I'll call it after the storm. He was quiet for a long time, then said, it suits. She turned to him. You think storms ever really end, Jasper? He looked out at the hills. Nope, they just change shape. But so do we. She smiled. And in that moment, beneath a sky too big for sorrow, they stood side by side. Not a broken girl and a lonely man anymore, but two survivors. Two people who'd found family not in blood, but in kindness. In choosing each other when the world had turned its back. And in that simple silence, the future looked wide open. Later that week, they painted the barn, something Jasper hadn't bothered with in years. He let Emily choose the color, and she picked a faded sky blue. Hope looks good in blue, she'd said with a wink. They laughed more, even sang while working, off-key but unapologetically loud. The townsfolk noticed the changes too. Folks who used to whisper about the grizzled cowboy, who kept to himself, now tipped their hats in passing. Some even started bringing baked pies and asking after Emily's drawings. Jasper, for the first time in a long while, didn't shy from their eyes. He didn't smile much, but he met people's gazes, and that was a beginning. One afternoon, Jasper found an envelope by the mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a simple note, written in a jagged hand. You were right. I don't deserve her, but I'm glad she has you. H. Jasper read it once, folded it, and tucked it into the breast pocket of his coat without a word. He didn't tell Emily. Some ghost didn't need naming. But that night, when she curled up in the chair by the fire, sketch pad on her knees, he said gently, "You've come a long way, kid." She smiled, setting the pad aside. "So have you." He chuckled. "Reckon we both still got road ahead." And they did. Because healing wasn't a destination. It was the long trail ride, the slow rebuild, the quiet understanding that life could still surprise you. Sometimes with pain, but often with grace. That summer, they opened the ranch gates to kids from the county, teenagers who needed space, peace, or just someone to listen. Jasper taught them to ride. Emily taught them to draw. Together, they offered something the world had once withheld from them both, belonging. They didn't speak of adoption, of paperwork, or legalities. Their bond needed no signatures. But on her 19th birthday, Jasper gave her a box. Inside was a locket. On one side, a tiny sketch of the ranch. On the other, a photo of them both, sunlit, slightly out of focus, but real. "I may not be your blood," he said quietly, "but you're my girl, far as I'm concerned." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't cry. She just hugged him hard and whispered, "You're my family, Jasper. You always will be."